All right, we did it. Can you hear me, Scott?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Everybody, I am here with my best friend, Scott Shaw. We're discussing Jack Kirby, and we're going to discuss my comic, Doris Danger, Her Giant Monster Adventures, which are a parody and homage of Jack Kirby's pre superhero giant monster in underpants comic books. Um, I don't know if you continue buying new versions of all the stuff that they release.
I have 4 shelves of Kirby stuff. Not for myself as much, but when I pass, I have almost all these comics. I mean, I don't
Uh-huh.
have all the pre-hero Marvel stuff, but a lot of it.
Yeah.
But I assume my son Kirby will probably want to sell them. But he's a big Kirby fan, so I will have a whole library. So when I'm gone, he still has all the material, but can cash in on my good taste.
Right, right. This one I pulled out. It's called the Marvel Monster Bus, and I assume it's supposed to be like an omnibus, but I like to think it's a giant bus with a bunch of monsters sitting in it, like they're going to school every morning on the monster bus.
With Ralph Cramden driving him because he kind of like a monster too.
So what I was going to share, the reason I like these hardcovers is because they started coming out when I had kids, and I've got two boys, and
How old are they now?
now my oldest is 17, my youngest is 14, so they're freshman and senior in high school.
So now
Uh,
they're making fun of dad.
yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny when they were little, they're like, "Oh, Dad's such a nerd," but now they're like, Dad's kind of cool actually. They came around, but it took some time. So, um, yeah. So I bought the hardcovers because when you've got little boys, I read to them every night, and so the hardcovers it was harder for them to destroy. When I was reading to them.
Did they ever complain that the stories were essentially always the same story?
Of course not. Of course not. So you know where I'm going with this.
Yeah, there we are.
Who do we have here, Scott?
I don't even remember his name. I just remember that he nobody could beat him.
Yeah, nobody can beat him, right?
Yeah.
I don't even know if it says his name. I'm looking on the pages here. So, uh, fans who are watching with us, memorize that cover. And Scott drew this handsome work, which I've tastefully uh, censored.
I
Uh,
like it that you had to use 2 pieces of tape to get the curvature just
that's
right.
that's three pieces, and I
Oh,
left
okay.
just a
Well,
hint of
that's
something
a
hairy
three-piece
below
monster.
and something hairy above, so
Yeah,
you
yeah.
can get a taste. And so your monster, it's a very similar tagline. Your planet is doomed, for no human can beat me off.
Well, look at the bottom. That's the funnier part. After Kirby.
Yes, yes.
Now, you have to understand, I did this. Mike Towery, one of the other Comic Con co-originators, after dealing with Sheldorf, I can never use the term founder again because he used it to the point of idiocy. But uh, I knew we had already met Jack, and he told me that he liked underground comics. So at 17, I assumed he liked underground comics the same reason I liked them. No, he liked them because people owned their own properties. They didn't have to draw in a house style. I didn't, he never mentioned that to me. So I figured, well, he just likes them, right? So I did that for him. And not only I didn't just bring the original, I brought a printed copy. Mike Towery printed like 1,000 copies and and immediately regretted it, from what I understand. The funniest thing was when I did it, made a trade with me for probably at least 1,000 or maybe 500 Carl Barks stories, original Uncle Scrooge issues from the early days. Mike was a comic dealer and he didn't know what to do with stuff like that. That wasn't superheroes. So I think we both thought we had making a great deal and the other one didn't know what he was talking about. But he's not mad at me, fortunately. He doesn't want the comics back, but he immediately burned most of them. He felt like, ugh. But anyway, I take it to Jack, and it's not just the art, it's a printed version. So I can now I'm thinking what's going through Jack's mind is how many people have this? Where is this being distributed? I can't, I mean, looking at now as a man, it's like, what was I doing to my hero? Well, it was more like your cat if when he goes outdoors and brings you a dead animal. That's kind of the more way I explained it to Jack years later. But he never held it against me, but he looked really nervous. He's like, well, I've got a family. And I said, well, Jack, and I can't believe I even said this. I said, Jack, why don't you just put it inside a closet on the inside door? Then nobody'd see it. And he's like, I'm like, why did looking back, how desperate was I for acceptance from Jack?
You
But
you you came to his table to present this
no, it
this
was his,
emotional piece, right?
no, it was at his home.
Oh boy. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was even worse. And anyway, years later, we were out to dinner with him and Roz, and he goes, you're finally, we were kind of worried about you, but now you're singing with the angels, or singing with the choir. I went, Jack, you're Jewish and I'm an atheist. Why do you think I'd be singing with a choir? He goes, that's just a term. But now we trust you. Now we thought you're a good boy. And I'm thinking, for all I know, Jack did stuff like that too when he was a kid. I mean, maybe not dirty, but trying to outrage people. But yeah, it didn't burn our relationship a bit. It actually made it stronger.
Hmm.
But at the time, seeing him looking horrified, that was definitely not the expression I was hoping for. But I mean, how cool it was, Jack. If some kid brought me Captain Carrot with some porn thing going on, I'd say, get out of here. And then I'd think, oh, come back. Jack told me to encourage you to do better things. You know. But anyway, we got to talk about the book. But I had to tell you that since you brought it up, I had to finish the story.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I brought it up. I wanted to hear the story. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, it's
So
astonishing to me that they still liked me after that.
yeah, that's very sweet, huh? It's a tricky thing, homage, right? And parody. Parody's even more tricky, right?
Yeah.
Because it is a thing of love, but you're also kind of destroying or poking fun at the thing you love, and that can feel hurtful.
But looking at him doing, the Fighting American and that stuff, and not Brandt, that, at the time, oh boy, they can draw funny stuff and it's funny. But looking back at it now, it's like that was pretty ballsy to ask your guys to do parodies of the stuff that they created. And then, and I love Marie's stuff, but by the end, Marie Severin was drawing 90% of it, and Tom Sutton, and I think they realized we can't be these guys are going to miss their deadlines on their actual titles if we keep asking them to work on not Brand X.
Yeah. Um, so we're kind of getting into the territory of what I'm doing with Doris Danger, talking about kind of tearing at your idols, right? This is my brand new book with Fantagraphics, Giant Monsters Amok, and it's very clearly just swipes of Kirby and of Kirby's Giant Monster stuff.
Yeah,
And
but you've gotten very good at those swipes. I mean, a lot of it looks, I mean, looks a little bit like Jack's final comics.
I spent a lot of times over 20 years of producing these, really poring over his work and just kind of thinking of it as it's all bullets for my gun, so to speak, you know, and so I kind of mix and match a lot of his different eras and
But
pile them all.
I didn't know that you could ape Steve Ditko every bit as well. In fact, possibly even a little better.
Ah, yeah, that was new to this volume. Uh, doing the Ditko
Yeah,
stuff.
I'd never seen any of that material before. It was very impressive.
It was all new. Yeah. So here's some of my Ditko. Yeah. And the idea there was after I'd been doing a couple graphic novels worth of Doris Danger, uh, I started getting a little interest for maybe doing a cartoon or something. And the structure of the Doris Danger stories I'd been doing, it was all, you know, here's a 5-page story and it begins in the middle of a cliffhanger and they get out of it and then it ends in a cliffhanger, as if there were just all these stories kind of floating around, but not put in order, right? And so, you know, just like when we were kids, you'd just snatch an issue off the shelf and you'd read it, and that's how comics were, where you just came in the middle and you never necessarily read to the end of that story. There weren't collections like we have now. There wasn't binging on Netflix like we have now.
Yeah, I being older than you, I was definitely, saving money, knowing which would be coming out, and the distribution was the problem with Marvel. And I remember I missed one, Tales to Astonish, where it had, I think it was when they were still doing Giant Man and the Hulk, and I couldn't find it anywhere. We wound up going to LA and they had one of the earliest comic book shops on the West Coast, and that's why I had to pay like $3 for it. I'm like, this is outrageous, but it was like, when you were at Marvel in those days, boy, if you missed something, you felt like you really weren't. Stan was incredibly smart, acting like letting us all feel like how grateful we should be to Marvel to have such great comics. The strange thing is we were, because the material elsewhere just wasn't nearly as exciting.
Yeah, and this whole aspect of consumption of comics is so different now, you know, and so my Doris Danger books, that's a really fun aspect to explore, in my opinion. And so getting back to when I started thinking about making cartoons, I realized that's probably not a great way to tell a cartoon story, and I should probably tell a sort of start to finish type of story. And so I took some of my snippets of ideas that had popped up in other issues, and I tried to fill in the gaps in between. And one of the in between gaps that it was suggested I fill in is that relationship of Doris Danger and her beau, Steve Wonder, the former astronaut. And so after that kind of petered out and nothing happened with it, I had written these stories. And I thought, hey, these might make nice romance comics if it's about that relationship. And then as I was thinking about, well, how can I portray that in this Doris Danger? Because it felt like different kinds of stories. And I thought, well, if visually I portray it as a different kind of story, and then it just made sense. Oh, they can be the Ditko stories, even
And I
even though
also
it's
really like
Kirby
the
that
fact,
did romance.
well, and Ditko was a master at the 9 panel page.
Hmm.
You can get so much information in there, and you don't have to do everything so detailed. You can just, and it's not cheating, and it's perfect for a romance thing. You never see that in romance comics. But the way you pulled it off, I thought, why didn't more people do this?
That's great.
Did Ditko ever do any romance comics himself?
You know, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. But
He probably did, but I don't. I know he did some war comics, but I've never seen any romance stuff from him.
yeah, I don't know. I tended to fall into the 6-panel grid whenever I'm parodying Kirby. And then, like you say, I went into the 9-panel grid for the Ditko stuff. And again, these are kind of aspects that aren't necessarily, you know, Kirby did a lot of 6-panel grids, especially in the later era. And like you say, Ditko was always doing the 6-panel grid. And so it just made sense. Even if it didn't make sense as a romance comic, it made sense to me as a Ditko comic and as a Kirby comic.
Absolutely.
Separate the two.
Absolutely. And you had to do more drawings, but not as detailed, and
Yeah,
very little backgrounds.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so that worked out great.
Yeah,
Ditko stuff never had the same appeal, but I always liked his stuff a lot because it didn't look like anybody else's, and it was definitely weird.
mhm.
It was in the idea of him doing romance comics cracks me up because his women always look like they were from outer space. And even the names of characters were like, what did you just, it was kind of like the monster names. It was kind of like, well, nobody has a name like that. What are you talking about?
He, whether he did any romance comics or not, I think of his Spider-Mans, and he had so much romance in those stories. The pining Peter Parker and the sort of love triangle between Betty, you know what I mean, and Gwen, and so I do think of him as a romance comic guy, whether he actually did any or not.
I don't remember the name of it, but there was a fair, like maybe a 20 issue series that was kind of looking back on those early issues. And it was very clear that they were kind of pointing out how much it resembled the Archie characters in a certain way. And I thought that was interesting because I never really thought about it, but Flash Thompson is definitely, kind of a combination of Reggie and the big dumb guy, the whole thing. But I have some questions for you about the book
Great.
because I certainly followed when you were publishing Doris Danger, but we all know that and even the fact that this is in a new, to me at least, it's a new uh, name for a certain series of books here. They have it underground, and the stuff that I saw you doing before was always black and white, as I remember. Um, and everybody's your best friend. Is Ricky really one of your best friends?
That's a great question. And the reason I think it's a great question is in all the Doris Danger comics, they're edited by Rob Oder. And Rob Oder is my fictional character who is kind of a Stan Lee type editor, who's the carnival barker of, how great is everything. And like I've gotten emails from comic conventions saying, "Hey, Chris, could you put us in touch with Rob? We need people to cover some of our panels, for our news magazine." And I have to tell them, "Oh, funny you should ask," and I almost think should I like get myself a press hat and go in disguise as Rob Oder and cover some of this, and so I'm not above creating fictional characters, and all the letters pages I write in Doris Danger are all completely made up, and Ricky Sprague is a real best friend, and he really did color this, and
Now, here's my next question.
yeah, yeah.
Fantagraphics is always trying to push the boundaries. Did they suggest that you go back and add the elements of, being scribbled on and the coloring not being adequate? I love the fact that you had that one explanation about how, well, if we don't have enough time to do it, we'll just occasionally have a whole panel of nothing but dialogue. And I thought, not only does that sound funny, but it reminded me of EC and some of those things where it's like the panel would be half dialogue and the characters just like their eyes are looking out.
I'm showing off some of the blemishes. This was all Ricky, and basically Ricky and I met Ricky years ago through a friend. Ricky had been writing, I think, for Mad Magazine and Cracked and things like that. Great sense of humor. He was an animator, and we talked about doing some animation together. We were starting to kind of develop the Doris Danger cartoon idea together, And if you go to my YouTube channel, you can find some of the animated little snippets he did in the old Marvel 60s cartoon style, where you literally cut out a panel from a comic and you just, it's still, but the mouth moves, or it's still, but the hand goes like this, and so we're having a lot of
Absolutely.
fun with
At
that.
at the time, it was more frustrating to me because when that show came out, I immediately wanted to see every episode. And I understood the budget issues, but what drove me crazy was it's a Ditko Hulk, and then suddenly it's a Kirby Hulk, and then it's back to Ditko. It's like, no, 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 it's driving me crazy. But the average kid wouldn't notice any of that,
Yeah,
right?
they would take Iron Man when he was all golden, and they would just put a little red stripe on his head and on his shirt, and then they would take a later, they would take a heck Iron Man and then a completely different iron suit of Kirby drawing it, and it was hilarious how they mixed and matched.
But looking back between the voice acting and the way that they pared things down, I still think those are some of the best Marvel cartoons ever.
Well,
I
to
really do,
me,
because first of all, it wasn't somebody trying to imitate a style. The style was already there. They were adapting specific stories.
straight from the
Yet
comics.
the Fantastic Four series Hanna-Barbera did was kind of a disappointment in a way because occasionally they'd write their own story and it was not nearly as good as the adaptations they do. But I actually I've got something that may happen or may not happen that will involve animation about the history of Comic Con. And
Ooh.
I'm thinking, well, that's the way I want to do it. Because not looking cheap, because now it doesn't have to look cheap. I mean, I think um that Black Panther series that was probably 20 15 years ago was kind of done like that, but with modern stuff, so it didn't look cheap. It just looked, you know, calm. But I don't have any problems with that stuff at all. I think it's rather good. But the other thing I was wondering is, I mean, Fantagraphics is always trying to do something unique. Was that something suggested to make it more weird looking, to
This
make it more unique for Fantagraphics, or was that your
this was
idea?
all in the works before Fantagraphics. Yeah, it was just Ricky and I spitballing ideas. I loved the cartoons he did, and when nothing came of it, I said, "Hey, how would you feel if we continue collaborating, and let's play with the coloring?" I haven't done a book in color before, and you know how much time it takes to do comics. So if you can find a buddy that can color for you so that you can focus on writing and drawing. And he, I said, I just want it to look old and cheap. He did all this research, and he just packed so much humor into that coloring. And then we
You
presented
must
it.
have looked at a lot of Charlton comics
He did.
because,
Yes.
because Charlton had the cheesiest coloring and they had their own printing press. And
Yes.
they were owned by the mob. They didn't give a damn what they looked like, just get it out there. And
Yeah.
I'm sure they were probably printing a lot of pornography with the same thing too, because that's the mob for you.
Yeah. So Ricky and I basically just said, here's the project, Fantagraphics. And I was frankly shocked that they didn't put in more editorial input. And I've come to learn that they just are a company all about the respect of the creator and the artist, and what is the vision of that cartoonist, and how can they help make a package that is what we creators had in our head. And it was to the point where, you know, they did ask for a cleaner look on my text pages, which are kind of my pseudo historical pages about the history, the fake history of the comic,
But
just so
but
that
that
it was
that
clean enough,
makes
it was
more sense
readable.
though, because people have to be able to read it. I mean,
Exactly.
I'm not, this in no way is this despairing what you've done, but the color perks it up because frankly, this is not a book where you can sit down and read the whole thing from cover to cover. even reading one story, if you're reading everything, it wears you out because there's so much going on. But I appreciate that. You compress stuff, you you allude to things that we really don't know what they're talking about. And it's funny as hell, but it's a lot of work. There's no just, 3 or 4 word balloons. Everybody's kind of hunched over, So I think that's fine.
Yeah.
But it's very unique because um there's a lot going on besides the pictures and the words.
Yeah, you bring up something that is another aspect that I thought would be fun to explore, and it goes back to what I was talking about earlier, where it's just one snippet of a longer story is all you get. And so a character, shows up on a panel and says, "I'm this person, and this is my weakness, and uh, this is what I'm going to try and do." And he says it out loud as if people talk that way, and that's all you need to know about that character to read that page. And so even though this is a graphic novel, I kind of envisioned it more like, I call it toilet reading, right? You leave it on your toilet. When you go in there and sit down, you don't need to start from the beginning. You can just open it up to any page. You'll be caught up after you read one panel. You read that one page, you get a few laughs.
That's what I've been telling everybody. This is the perfect bathroom book
Yeah.
because, and if you drop it in the tank, then buy another one. But but seriously, that's when I was a kid, and most kids were, I think, that way. That's where you read your comics, to the point where my parents were like banging the, I know, Mom, I gotta finish this comic. No, you gotta finish the bathroom, and you can read the comic in your bed. But but in fact, Julie Schwartz once said, he said, comic books length should be about the time you have a good dump. I just edited that for your thing, but it's kind of true because he knew that I don't know how he knew it, but maybe Weisinger told him after talking to all the kids. But it's like they kind of knew that's where we were reading them.
About 20 minutes is just about right.
Yeah,
45 minutes if you're a slow reader. And that's slow readers tend to need more time in the bathroom too.
that's right. That's right. Well, Marvel put out that toilet paper in the 70s when everybody's making toilet paper. And they actually
Wow.
hired Marie Severin to do a new story.
So like you read it as you go, is that how it works?
Well, it's only about six pages worth of story, and then it repeats itself.
6 squares.
Yeah.
So this is actually something kind of interesting I was thinking about with the direction you went from indie comics to more family friendly children's books, and me publishing this book at Fantagraphics, which, as you mentioned, is uh, their audience is not children, and
Unless they've got Peanuts books and stuff that
well,
kids can't afford.
that's true. That's true. My Doris Danger book, I could have gone into those realms of parody. I could have filled it with language and sex and violence and whatever, and found interesting ways of you know satiring culture and whatever. But I chose instead to be thinking about these more kind of meta ideas of comics through the language of children's comics, right? And so that puts my book in this sort of weird place where it's kind of for kids, but kids could read it, but they might not get it and appreciate it.
I think it's much more for people that grew up reading cheap looking comics. I mean, and your audience is more likely people 60 and up because we know exactly what that stuff looked like.
Yeah, and actually, the people working the Fantagraphics booths at conventions, they would tell me people would look at my book and they'd be puzzled and they couldn't wrap their head around it. They'd be thinking, so is this reprints of old comics? No, no. So this is new works? Yeah, yeah. Uh, so how old is the guy doing this? Is he like 85? No, no. It's an enigma to everybody.
I'll show you the enigma for me. This guy. I'm not going to mention him. I'm not going to mention the book, but you really want to read a comic this bland. Of course, he has lots of Stan Lee quotes, so he can fill up 3/4 of each page with it. But this is a new book that resembles what you've done without any of the interest at all, and a pretty mediocre drawing style too. At least he didn't draw him like in the Jack one where he looks like a anime character for some weird reason. It was like, yes, that's what I always thought about when I was looking at Jack. He reminds me of Astro Boy. There you go. No, I would much rather see your fantasy than his.
That's sweet of you to say. Yeah. And I have some pages with some real text. Talk about a slog to get through. Look at
Yeah,
that right
well, I
there.
mean that's the point, though. I mean, that's like seeing some of Roy Thomas's early dialogue or mine. I mean, those Captain Carrots I wrote, some of them are just so overdone, I can't believe it. But I was trying to make sure they were funny. But yeah, the characters all had hunchbacks after a while. No, I really appreciate all the effort you went into this, and I just hope there are more people like myself that understand what you're doing, because now the public, due to the world of marketing, they already have expectations about what a book should be.
Hmm. Yeah.
And that's probably why it mystifies people at the conventions.
I
Because,
think if you, what you create falls into this set of what is expected. Oh, a story's got to have a beginning and a middle and an end, and it's got to have the likable character, and they have to take this course where we can see them either realize their mistakes and do good, or fall in love, or punch out the villain, or whatever that familiar story arc is. Then everyone's comfortable with that. But if if you challenge the reader more, it can be a trickier sell. And I think of, nowadays we're a culture of the AI telling us what we'll like, based on what we've said we already like, whether it's Spotify or Netflix. And so I try to create work that kicks you out of that formula, but the danger of that is, one, how do people know if they're going to like that if it's outside of that formula, and also how do you find it, but how do you know that you should even look for it, and when you found it, how are you going to experience it if this is all new to you? These are some of the challenges I'm kind of working through.
yeah, I just did a new project that's on Aces Weekly. It's a online thing that David Lloyd puts
Hmm.
together.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I drew it in a style I've never drawn before. Did it all about home care nursing, and I got my friend Mike Cazala to color it because I knew he'd color it completely differently. I just at my age, I want to keep doing things I've never done before.
Good for
It,
you.
it stars a woman. I haven't done anything like Human Woman. I haven't done anything like that before. Uh, it's it's funny, but it's dark.
Hmm.
Um, because not necessarily the patients or the nurse, but just the business that she's in, and how they control their nurses to go into homes that they're not prepared on what they're going to see. And so it's always refreshing to do something that you've never seen before. And nowadays, especially, again, marketing is kind of our enemy, in my opinion, because they're trying to make everybody so excited about the next big thing. And assuming that people forgot that last week they told you what happened this week would be the best thing you've ever seen, and it was a piece of crap. And I'm kind of hoping for maybe to go back to having a new superhero movie once every 3 years. People are just getting so overwhelmed by all the material available that entertainment, including comics, if you go into a comic shop, it's like white noise. I don't know what to look at. And what I do look at, I'm going, I don't want that. And and sometimes the best stuff isn't necessarily the stuff that's the best drawn. Linda Berry was a good example. But I went to a convention that was all for, alternative type comics. And I thought, oh, well, underground comics, that fits in. And it was all stuff that looked so amateurish. And I thought, well, yeah, that's kind of the way in the majority of underground comics. We just remember the good stuff. But if you are interested, then you have to buy it because you have to read the whole thing to determine whether it was good or not. And a lot of stuff you could just kind of take a glance at, right? So I feel bad when people are experimenting because you kind of have to kind of trust them enough to take it home and spend some time looking at.
Yeah, so true.
Yeah, the whole way of marketing things is, I imagine that people are finally kind of getting burned out by telling everybody how brilliant stuff is, and maybe they're going to try to find it on their own again. But
that'd be
so
great.
far, I don't see too much too much of that going on. It's like, no, I'm a Marvel guy, I'm a DC guy. Still, it's like,
Or I'm a Batman guy, or I'm a Spider-Man guy. It can be even more specific.
yeah, because there's so many books out there that you can't afford to buy a whole line. You can only follow Spidey and his 800 different spin-off comics, or even more so Batman. I think there are more Batman comics out there than the rest of the DC characters put together. And how interesting can you make Batman? Oh, they did show him naked that time. Yeah. And then acted like, oh, how did they get through? Oh my gosh, we're going to have, no, that was very obvious. We need to get some new, they were looking at Archie comics. How can we do something outrageous to get people our comics to sell? That doesn't last for long. Look what's happened to Archie. They brought back the old style almost immediately.
Well, Scott, we're out of time. It is always such a joy visiting with you. I always wish we had more time. Thank you so much for.
My pleasure. I really enjoy the book, and I'm glad you asked me because I've liked your work for a long, long time.
Yeah, and it's so great knowing that you're a fan and friend of Kirby, that you appreciate and see what I'm doing here. That means a lot.
Well, among all of your quotes, there was, I forget who it was, said, Jack could probably tell you to work on your own style. And
Mike
that's
Royer.
definitely the case. Yeah.
Mike Royer.
Jack would tell me, everybody says, do it your way. Do it your way.
Yeah,
So,
Royer. He said to me, Jack would tell you, kid, draw in your own style.
what you'd tell Jack is, well, this is my version of not Brand X. Oh, okay. Now I get it.
Hope to see you soon, Scott.
I
Take
hope so
care.
too.
All right.
All right. Take care. Bye bye. Thanks for asking me.
Oh, thanks so much for this. It was great.